with France within the next 3 months. In a joint statement, the ruling juntas of the two countries say they are ending the tax pacts due to what they describe as France's persistent hostile attitude towards their countries and the unbalanced nature of the agreements, which results in a loss of revenue. Well, the deals were created to prevent Malian and Nigerian nationals who live in France from paying tax in two countries. They also prevent French nationals in the two African countries from paying twice. Well, this move follows a similar decision by the military government of Burkina Faso earlier this year. It's also the latest in a series of actions by the military governments of the three countries to sever ties with France, their former power, since they took powers in recent coups. Well, let's talk more on the relationship between these three countries. Joining us now in our Abuja studios is David Otto, defense and security expert. Hello, David. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Let's begin with your thoughts on this newfound alliance between Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso.
Well, I think it's not really new, but of course, you know, these countries are linked by what we describe as the Liptako-Goma triangle. But if you look at the recent happenings, as you rightly mentioned, these are three countries that are now ruled by military juntas after the democratically elected presidents, you know, were taken out of power through what has been described as a military coup. You know, I think the reaction, especially from the regional bodies like ECOWAS, but of course, you know, from the international community being pressured by France, has pushed these three nations to kind of form, you know, a glue, you know, to protect each other. So it's some kind of a survival, you know, mechanism that, you know, these three countries are generating, especially knowing fully well that the French will try to dig deep, you know, and, you know, destabilize these nations if possible. You know, so I think, you know, it's more or less what we're seeing at play is an anticipation, perhaps, of what might happen next. Remember, there's an expectation that these three countries will then hand over to some kind of, you know, a democratically, you know, a civilian government or civilian rule. So the more they get closer, the less likely we are to see, you know, these dates of handing over to a transitional government or, you know, a democratically elected process, you know, being instituted. But let's wait and see. But what we know is that, you know, I refer to them as the three musketeers of the Sahel as we speak.
Well, David, if you're referring to them as the three musketeers of the Sahel, we know the three of them have also quit the G5 Sahel security force that was meant to, you know, secure that region, leaving Chad and Mauritania alone in that alliance. What impact do you think this would have on the security of the Sahel region that has been battling, you know, jihadist insurgency?
Well, I think it would have a significant impact if all of a sudden three members of an alliance of five or so, you know, quit. You know, but of course, initially, you know, I think the argument would be that the G5 Sahel has not worked. Remember, one of the main reasons why these countries overthrew their democratically elected leaders was because, you know, they cited the lack of security, and especially when it comes to tackling jihadist organizations, you know, within the Al-Qaeda and the ISIS sectors. So the G5 was meant to do that. So because it didn't succeed, I don't think, you know, they had any reason to stay within that bloc. But initially, when this G5 was set up, I thought it was even a wrong idea because we already have the multinational joint task force. Initially, I believe that it would have been an expansion and more capabilities given to the multinational joint task force, to which countries like Nigeria, you know, and Cameroon, of course, you know, do have, you know, membership. I didn't see the need for the creation of the G5. So I'm not very surprised that it has collapsed, you know, especially at the time when, you know, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger deem it as some kind of an underhand, of the French, staying, as a result of, their interest in staying in the region after the Operation Back-In has been dismantled. So I'm not surprised, that, they're leaving, and I don't think it would have any much significant impact, from an operational point of view.
Also been talks of forming a federation between these three countries. How is this expected to work, and how successful do you think this would be?
Well, initially, after the condemnation, especially the most of the recent coups in that triangle, which was Niger, ECOWAS had threatened to launch a military operation to reinstate, President Bazoum. But that pushed the Nigerian and the Malians and the Burkinabés to form, what they call the Liptako-Goma Alliance, which, some kind of a defense and military pact. Interestingly, they initiated what was the equivalent of Article 5 for NATO, which was any attack by any internal or external aggressor against one state would be an attack on the other. So I think what is happening is that, we're seeing a much more strengthening of that alliance, first of all by, somehow quitting, the G5 Sahel. There's a possibility that, these countries, of course, they've been suspended from ECOWAS. They may not go back to being readmitted, as long as they do not hand over power to a democratic process, within the time frame which, they've promised to do so. But what I think they're looking for now is some kind of, creating a confederation, as they said, which is more an economic alliance, to try and trade between these three countries. Remember that they've been suspended, from ECOWAS, which is, of course, an economic, trade bloc, as it were. Of course, I know that ECOWAS is now, initiated, the ECOWAS standby force, which is a military aspect. But the fact that, Mali, Burkina Faso are no longer have been suspended from ECOWAS, and they need to survive. I think, the coming up of a confederation or a federation, whichever they decide to call it at the end of the day, it's a way of saying, let's trade between each other, at a time when we are all facing a common challenge, which is, being suspended from ECOWAS.
All right. We'll see how it all pans out for the countries. But thank you so much, David Otto, our defense and security expert.